7 of Nicomachean Ethics is broken into 15 sections. Section 1 describes the conditions of character to avoid no matter what: vice, incontinence, and bestiality. The opposite of bestiality is a heroic or divine state similar to a god, whose state is more honorable than virtue, while bestiality is a state compared to an animal. Continence and incontinence are states distinct from virtue and vice. A continent person makes a rational calculation of the right thing to do, and does it. An incontinent person makes the same rational calculation, but does the wrong thing anyway, knowing it is wrong, led by base appetite. Continence and incontinence are distinct from temperance, intemperance, and prudence. The puzzles in section 2 get more specific about what incontinence really means. Aristotle opposes Socrates' belief that no one knowingly does wrong. People may pardon a wrongdoer with an incorrect belief and no knowledge, since the wrongdoer did not know any better than to indulge an appetite. Nonetheless, incontinence clearly cannot be pardoned. The continent, strong-willed person chooses not to act on base appetites. The temperate person does not have base appetites in the first place. Continence is a virtue only if it helps someone follow true beliefs and convictions, not false ones. His statement about sophistical arguments warns reader about the Sophists, a group of philosophers in the 5th century BCE whose teachings continued to influence rhetoricians and philosophers for many generations. Sophists designed their arguments to confuse people deliberately, not to engage in a search for truth. In section 3, Aristotle wonders, does the incontinent person have full knowledge of what they're doing? First, he addresses what kinds of actions, pleasures, and pains incontinence might apply to. Aristotle argues there are different types of knowledge. Someone can have knowledge they don't use. People who are asleep or mad or drunk are not in a condition to apply their knowledge. Someone's strong feelings or spirited reactions may override their knowledge as well. Aristotle compares the incontinent person to an actor reciting lines but not knowing their meaning. They have only perceptual or limited knowledge, not full knowledge. In section 4, Aristotle discusses what incontinence is really about: pleasures and pains. Some pleasures are necessary, like the bodily pleasures of food and sex. People who pursue bodily pleasures to excess, or people who excessively avoid physical, painful experiences like hunger and thirst, are considered simply incontinent or soft, an intemperate person. Simple incontinence concerns the same bodily pleasures and pains intemperance does. Plus, not every indulgence in pleasure leads to incontinence. In section 5, bestial and diseased people, because of their deformities or habits or base natures, find pleasure in what is not meant to be pleasant at all. Cannibalism, illness, madness, or even habit can lead to bestial vices. In section 6, Aristotle further divides incontinence into matters of spirit and appetite. He considers incontinence of spirit less shameful. Incontinence of spirit includes irrational anger. Incontinence of appetite merely requires following pleasure, and it's the more shameful form of incontinence. In section 7, how do the pleasures and pains from touch and taste relate to continence? Aristotle explains softness and resistance. An incontinent person is prone to be overcome by pleasures, while a continent person controls his desire for pleasure. Softness and resistance concern pain. A soft person will be easily overcome by pains, while a resistant person controls the fear of pain. In section 8, Aristotle explains in more detail why intemperance is worse than incontinence. Intemperate people do not regret their actions, and regret is needed for change. But incontinent people know they're incontinent and are capable of feeling regret. In section 9, Aristotle asks, is sticking to any decision enough to make someone continent, or does continence require someone to stick to the correct decision? The continent person will stick to a true or correct belief in every case. Indulging a shameful pleasure indicates incontinence. A continent person has base appetites for pleasure, but will not follow them. Section 10 discusses further questions that may arise about incontinence. Aristotle then reminds readers about prudence, then illustrates the difference between a weak-willed person and a person who's genuinely base and corrupt. An incontinent person is like a city that passes good laws but never follows through on them by enforcing them. A base person, or vicious person, is like a city that follows through and enforces its laws, except the laws are bad. In section 11, Aristotle examines the nature of pleasure in depth. Some call pleasure not an end, but a beginning. In section 12, Aristotle argues that goods are too diverse to make broad assumptions about pleasure. Some goods are activities, and some are states of being. Consider how some are good for us in one state, but not in another. Some are good in moderation, but not in excess. In section 13, Aristotle continues that the goods people enjoy are too diverse to make broad assumptions about pleasures. Some goods are good without qualifications, or always good, and some are right only for certain people, or are ideal for us in one state, but not in another, or in moderation, but not in excess. Prudence is not hindered by pleasure. Prudent people still enjoy pleasures that are good without qualification, like learning. In section 14, pleasure must be good, as a contrast to pain, since pain is a known evil, something to be avoided. Furthermore, the happy life cannot exist without the activity of pleasure, so the best good needed for the happy life must involve some type of pleasure. But if pleasure is not a good, why do happy people have pleasant lives? Excellent people consistently seek the good, and this good must include pleasure. In section 15, Aristotle addresses the argument that certain pleasures, like study, are choice-worthy, while bodily pleasures are not. The only bad part of bodily enjoyments is excess indulgence, including excessive avoidance of pain or indulging while trying to drive pain away. Humans rely on a complex and imperfect human happiness to approach the contentment of the gods.